All right. Well, I tell you what, it's 5 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Part of this, you know, in these tech talks, we do a lot of we throw names of parts around, and sometimes I have to remind myself that you guys may not know what a lot of these parts are. So we're going to start out. What we mentioned last week, we were going to talk about driveline transmissions, some of the common issues with stock Harleys, and then how we can make improvements. And then we also have some questions. I actually got quite a few private messages from people asking questions. So I grabbed one particular question that I think will pretty much consume most of our tech talk here today, and it will cover a lot of the really good subjects there too. So anything on the Baker trans with reverse? Yes, I did look into that as well. And I want to make sure that we cover that. All right, so we'll get started. The best place to start is inside the primary. We've heard that word thrown around, the primary, and what's actually in there. If you're underneath the left-hand side, you know, cover, the big cover that's down on the bottom, that's your primary gear case. All right, and essentially at the front, what you have is the sprocket shaft of the flywheel, crankshaft that comes out. You have a compensating sprocket that bolts to that, sprocket and compensator, excuse me. Then you have a very big chain that goes all the way around to the clutch basket on the back that houses the clutch. Then you have a tensioner in the middle, and that clutch basket, it's basically a two-piece assembly. You have a hub and an outer basket. One piece is rigidly connected to the main shaft in the transmission, rides in a bearing, and then the other part drives the belt for the back end. So let's show you some of the parts. As far as the compensating sprocket goes, essentially it's a combination of an alternator and a compensator. So on the engine case, you actually have your stator assembly that bolts with the coil windings all the way around it, that bolts to the engine case. And then what goes over the top of that is a rotor assembly. You can see the magnets on the inside there. And of course, the splines there, that's connected to the crankshaft. That turns, that turning creates your AC voltage, and that's the basis for your charging system. Okay, and we'll go through some of the basic components and then get back to the details in a second. On top of that rotor assembly, you have a spring pack, and this is the actual compensating sprocket here. It's what the chain goes around. And on the other end of that chain, you have a clutch hub. All right, you have your ring gear here. That's what the starter drive connects, turns the primary assembly to crank the engine over. Then you have this sprocket here that it's driven off the primary chain, and then in the center is where you would have the hub and the clutch plates go on the inside, and that's how the assembly works. Now, that has been the same forever. So no big changes. What's changed are the actual components and how they work on the inside. Starting in 2007, there were quite a few changes to stock Harley parts. Traditionally, what has always happened is that rotor assembly that I showed you here, you then had essentially a spring pack that went on the top of it and then bolted into place. Well, in 2007, Harley came up with this idea. And what they did, they took the rotor assembly and then welded this spring pack to it. All right, you can see there's a bunch of little tiny diaphragm springs in here. There's not very much to them, and there's actually only 4 diaphragm springs in there. Why the springs are there? You have this piece, okay, see the fingers on that? And then you have this piece. That's the front sprocket that I mentioned a second ago. The reason they call this a compensating sprocket is that in conjunction with that spring pack, these two pieces mate together. And you'll notice that's a ramp assembly. All right, every time it ramps up like that, it puts spring tension on the sprocket and holds this assembly together to keep it as tight and rigid as possible. All right, so what the purpose of this is to absorb the engine pulses. All right, so as engine pulsating, going through its revolutions, this can rock back and forth and absorb some of those pulses and reduce a lot of the vibration and jerk and snatch, things like that on the transmission. Okay, now here's where the problem came in 2007, several problems actually. The first thing, you can only imagine how much stress this assembly takes, okay, in the impacts. Now, if you'll notice, I don't know if this camera is going to show it. If you look very close, you'll see how much wear you have here and how far up it's worn onto this ramp assembly. And what's wearing against it are the little tits that's on this here. All right. So what happens over time is that spring pack starts to lose its tension. And that allows this to ride further and further up into the assembly, just like that. All right, now when it does that, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard it, some of the characteristics is you'll hit the start button and you'll hear a real loud clunk. All right, that clunk that you're hearing is essentially that, okay? But mostly you'll hear it when you shut the engine off. And you'll hear it real hard in the primary. And what you're hearing is that loose spring pack assembly and this flopping around in there. Now, when it does that, of course, you're creating kind of tight and loose areas in the chain relative to the engine position, and that can snatch on the starter, snatch on, you know, the ring gear and all that type of stuff, create kickback, various other things like that. Another time you would hear it is if you put the transmission in first gear, leave the clutch released without the engine running, sit on the bike and rock it back and forth. Now you hear some clunk coming from the transmission, a little bit is normal. But if you hear a very loud clunk coming down from the primary at the smaller end of the bell at the front next to your foot, then you know you've got some compensator issues. All right, now, again, I'll go back to this. If we look at how small these spring packs are, real small, all right? Over a very short period of time, as they wear out, and that extends, that becomes an issue. Well, Harley recognized that as a problem, and relatively quickly after that, they came out with what they called at the time Screaming Eagle compensator, which had much larger springs. All right, well, it had much larger springs, and then it had a small wafer washer, like a friction washer essentially, that acted as a bearing plate. And the fingers were different. They were actually more aggressive, larger, and engaged the onto the compensating sprocket itself a lot deeper. That was a great solution. It was, well, a great solution for a little while anyway. They began to use it, I believe it was in 2010. They used that as original equipment on all trike models because of, you know, the extra load being a trike. Became standard equipment on trikes. And then I believe in 2012, it became standard on all bikes, that upgraded version of the compensator. To compound this issue with the compensator, there were also several problems with the cranks. Most people have been in the industry long enough, especially reputable engine builders, and a lot of people suffered from this. Crank problems. Okay, so we had also talked about last week about run out in the crank, you know, how much wobble is in the shaft on either side. And it was permissible under warranty for a crank to have as much as 12 thousandths total run out. All right, so if we can imagine, you've got the sprocket shaft coming through the primary, you've got the compensator bolted to the compensator sprocket, and then you've got 12 thousandths run out on the crank. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Remember that one. All right. The next side of that compounds the problem with the factory primaries, we go back to the clutch basket. Now, I wish I had a way to demonstrate this to you. Unfortunately, I don't. But if any of you have ever had a primary part and a primary chain off of it, the clutch out, to where your clutch hub can free spin inside of the basket. All right, if you take and you hold, I'll see if there's some way I can shoot a video of this at some point. But if you hold the outside of the clutch basket and then you grab the clutch hub and spin it, then you would see the clutch basket move in that motion there. I've seen them move as much as 1/4 of an inch, to the point that even the inside of the ring gear on the clutch basket actually hits the inside of the inner primary. All right, so you have that assembly that's moving and doing that, okay? Then you potentially have an excessive amount of crank run out on the front that's doing this. Now we've got to remember, we've got two huge rotating assemblies, right? And these are spinning at engine speed, okay? Because again, we're using the sprocket up the front is going to move at engine speed, all right? So in an ideal world, you would have perfect concentricity between the clutch hub, the clutch basket, the main shaft on the transmission, and they would also be concentric to your sprocket shaft in the front, and also the compensating sprocket, and all of them should be able to turn without creating any oscillation in the chain. But if you add all of that together, and you have the variability in the clutch basket as it rotates when you're spinning the hub, then you have the variability of the crank itself and the excessive runout, and then you have a loose compensator bouncing around in there. What you create is an enormous amount of this in the chain as the assembly rotates around. Okay, so just by holding the clutch basket itself with the chain in place, of course engine not running, and you hold the basket and spin the hub, you can see the chain drop as much as a quarter, and in some cases even a half of an inch. Okay, so the chain is moving up and down the entire time that it's spinning. All right, so the chain essentially beats itself to death in there. All right, so in Harley's infinite wisdom, they decided to put automatic primary chain tensioners in. Now, if we go back years and years ago, yeah, it's actually been quite a few years ago now, back when manual chain tensioners were factory equipment, even in your factory service manuals, the instructions were to find the tight spot in the chain and then adjust it to 5 to 7/8 cold. Okay, and then it was 3/8 to 5/8 when it's hot. But the idea was that you found the tight spot of the chain and adjusted it there. All right, and the reason you would do that, and the tight spot of the chain on the top of the chain, that's very important because that's your heavy tension side. Okay, so the reason you found the tight spot is that they were anticipating a slight amount of runout in the clutch basket, slight bit of runout on the sprocket shaft side, and they did not want those to create a chain that was too tight. Right, because when it is too tight, then what happens is you're pulling in on your sprocket shaft and your main shaft on the transmission. How are we? Is everybody good on that? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Make sure we're following me so far before I get too crazy. We're in good shape? Yep, got a thumbs up right there. Okay, cool. So we didn't want it to pull in too tight. Well, when Harley came out with the automatic primary chain tensioner, that tensioner is located on the bottom. And every time the slack side rolls around, it's a ratchet mechanism with a very small amount of free play in it. So when that slack side comes around on the chain, that tensioner is tightening up, and it continuously tightens up and tightens up. And when you have that variability in the chain bouncing around and moving all over the place, then you end up with a chain that is excessively tight as it's going through the rotation. And I would say it's very commonplace for us to change main bearings in transmissions, 20, 30,000 miles in a lot of cases. Now, when we find ourselves having to replace main bearings in transmissions that early, most of the time we also have a problem with main shaft runout on the trans, a problem with the clutch basket, or a problem with the crank. So we always, anytime we go into the primary and we're dealing with an issue like that, we always want to check runout on each of those shafts and check everything to make sure that everything is straight. That covers the basic OE stuff on primary, and then I'm going to get to how to make all of that better, and then I'm thinking that we'll get into, we'll actually talk about gearing and different transmissions and things like that. All right, we got Mike Jones. Hey buddy, what's happening? And Steve Slasinski, did I say that right? I think so. Yeah, thanks for joining us, Steve. Okay, as I told y'all from the very beginning, most of you that have ever dealt with me, you know how I am. I like to distinguish clearly between opinion and fact, okay? And then if it is in fact opinion, it would be educated from education and experience, of course, but then I would invite you to do your own research and find out for yourself. So I necessarily don't want these videos to turn into product endorsement videos because I'm not one to buy into, I'll just call it what it is. I don't buy into marketing bullshit. That's not my thing. It either works or it doesn't, period. And I'm only going to use stuff that works, okay, no matter what the marketing tells us. But in order for me to tell you how to fix a lot of these problems, then I have to tell you about some products as well. So one of the first things that we want to talk about is getting rid of that automatic primary chain tensioner and going back to a manual primary chain tensioner. All right, when we do that, we immediately see a lot of different things. We see smoother shifting, we see less clunking, we see it's easier to find neutral. I would say that you see more of a profound improvement on the bikes that started out worse, if that makes sense. The one that has more crank one out, one with a compensator that's not all that great, one with a clutch basket that's not concentric to the hub. The worse that it is, obviously the manual tensioner is going to make more of an improvement. But the best one that we have found out there is the one from Baker. Unfortunately, you have one on the wall? No, we sell through those things so fast that I mean, anytime we go on a primary, we put those in. It's a $200 part, and but when you're looking at saving thousands from either replacing a transmission or $1,500 or so to replace a main bearing in a transmission, it's worth spending a couple of $100 to extend the life of that part. Now, the way this thing looks, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see it. It's that part right there. That right there. All right. And basically, when you install that, you put that in exactly like you would the old manual tensioners from days gone by, and adjust it exactly the same. Now, one of the differences is on the 07 and later primary chain case, the sprocket is so big, the chain gets very, very close to one of the bolt bosses at the bottom. So when we adjust that chain, it's pretty critical. We've got to be able to squeeze in that 5/8 to 7/8 range. If you get much further than that, then you'll start to hear a loud tapping noise in there, and typically that tapping noise is the chain tapping the bottom of the primary chain case. So when we adjust that, if we find that we can achieve that 5/8 to 7/8 chain slack adjustment, then we have to look further. Again, it's going to be in main shaft in the transmission, main bearing in the transmission, clutch basket, or compensator that's creating that much of a variance as the chain is spinning around. So hopefully all that makes sense. So that is one big thing that we do to make a big improvement on that. Now, one other thing that Baker came out with, and I'm going to see if I have a picture of that in here. I probably do. See if they have one. Ah, here we go. Right there. Well, that's the tensioner, and then that's the new compensating sprocket. Baker came out with a compensating sprocket that is a retrofit to the old style cup and spring, the two-piece. And we've installed them since the day that they came out, and we've had incredible success with it. We had mentioned that. I know Michael's on here. We had put one of those in Mike's. We had a small issue with it during the install, but we called it, and that problem was resolved and has since been fixed. And we have not had any issues at all with that product at all. And we have done, of course, as like I said, a ton of the manual chain tensioners. We try to do those as much as we can. Now, one of the things to install that Baker compensating sprocket, if you have an 07 to 2010 or 12, I have to remember my dates on that, you would have the rotor that looks like this that has the integrated spring pack on it. So basically, we'd have to get a rotor that does not have the integrated spring pack on it, and then their compensator can be put on top of that. So that would be an exception there. I think that covers. Before I move on to a question from a customer that, question that came in that I think will fire us off on our next topic. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Let's see. Having a problem with my jack shaft screw backing out and ring gear breaking due to compression. Who does best on compression releases? Let's see. Well, I tell you, Gary, it could be, I mean, who does best? I mean, we do. But I mean, it could be another thing. I mean, if that could be a whole nother discussion entirely. If it's kicking back, and depending on your bike, if it's a carbureted bike, I could probably help you with the kickback on a programmable ignition. But I'd like to talk to you further about that and see, because there could be a few things, starter issues, whatever else that could be causing that. But it could also be compensator kicking back. I mean, let's be honest. Let's let's see what else, how to address that. I would probably, if the engine's running well and engine is good, I would want to chat with you offline, I guess, and see if I can help guide you in a direction that would, if the engine's good, it'd be shame to tear an engine down if something else could fix the problem without just putting compression releases in it. So let's see, anybody else? Any questions? I think we're good. Okay. I'm going to hop into one message that I got. I have a 2006 Road Glide with 100 horse, 105 torque, 98 inch. Oftentimes I find myself looking for a sixth gear. What might my options be? Things I've considered are swapping out the 5-speed for a 6-speed. Which brand? Baker, Screaming Eagle, Gems, RevTech, etc. Otherwise, how feasible is it to drop a couple teeth on the rear tire pulley? I think a certain year Sportster pulley will fit with some light machine work. Is there any options to overdrive the primary in the same fashion as I mentioned at the belt pulley ratio? Okay, let's start with let's start with what brand. I've got to be, this is where, again, I told you guys I would distinguish between fact and opinion. So this is where opinion is going to come in. Out of all the transmissions that I've worked on and the thousands of bikes that I've worked on over the years, there has only been one brand of transmission that I've never had to fix or replace. And I've even taken some of these transmissions and put 300 horsepower in front of them and absolutely beat them to death. There was one particular one when the Grudge Box first came out from Baker. Well, I just gave away the cat there, I guess. What I'm referring to is Baker's transmissions, Baker Driveline stuff. And one of the challenges with me was when the Grudge Box came out, right before they released it, was to put it behind the baddest thing you got and beat it to death, and that's exactly what I did. And I couldn't break the transmission. It's as simple as that. And I've repaired a lot of other brands of transmissions. I'll be honest, I've only had maybe a dozen bikes with, say, Gems transmissions in them, and I don't recall having a common problem with them. I would say that they're good. I mean, a lot of stuff that Gems makes is actually really good too. But with absolute certainty, the one brand that I've never had to fix or ever repair after it's been installed is a Baker. So if it were my own bike, it's going to get a Baker, period, like all my personal bikes do. So on this question in particular, there's several things that he's covered here. We've got to understand what the purpose of the primary drive, the transmission, and the secondary drive is. It's all about gear reduction and torque multiplication, right? So you can achieve more torque, obviously, by lowering gear ratios. You know, like if you went from what would be stock at a 315 on a, say, 5-speed transmission, let's talk the simple ones before we get into the overdrive stuff. So, you know, if you had a 315 final drive and you took it to a 337 final drive, the engine itself is going to produce at the crank the same horsepower and torque, obviously. But if we lower that gear ratio to, say, a 337, then what you're going to have is more torque multiplication. But there's pros and cons anytime you do anything with Driveline. In order to gain something in one place, you have to give up something in another. Okay, so by going to that 337 final drive gear, say in a 5-speed, you're going to gain that torque multiplication, and at the lower RPMs, obviously you're going to have it's going to feel that like you have more torque. You have more force at the rear wheel available because of you know, the gear reduction and, again, torque multiplication. Okay, so you'll have more torque at the rear wheel. All right, but what changes at the same time is the operating RPM of the engine. So depending on how the engine is built and what exact, you know, power curve you're dealing with there, where you want your target power to be, you're going to change that relative to vehicle speed. Okay, that seems to make sense to everybody, I guess. But what you give up on the top end, of course, is higher engine RPMs at highway speeds. All right, and it can be significant. It can be 500-700 RPM. So again, you have more torque down low, but you're spinning more RPMs up top, and it all comes down to efficiency of the engine. All right, so depending on where your power band is, in most cases, especially on fuel-injected bikes, the way the command works in the fuel injection system, as engine load increases, then the required fuel is going to increase as well. Okay, so the more load the engine is under, you're going to consume more fuel. Fuel economy is going to go down. So let's imagine, let's do a for instance. Let's say your peak, good middle power curve is say 3,000 RPM, and but it climbs a little more up to 3,200 to 3,400 RPM before you hit peak power, which would be its most efficient point. All right. So let's say we take that 5-speed and we go from that 315 final drive ratio and we take it to a 336. Yes, it's spinning more RPMs, but if you're more into the power curve, the engine is more efficient, making more power, more torque multiplication at the area. So then that means the engine is under less load, so you could very well consume less fuel if even though the engine's running at a higher RPM. So to spin that off another way, make a little more sense. If you were to say take a late model factory 6-speed bike and you're running at 2,500 RPM, or let's use a given speed. Let's pick a low speed. Let's say 55 miles an hour. Okay, and you ride that bike in 5th gear, and then you switch it into 6th gear, still running 55 miles an hour. Yes, you will see a lower engine RPM, but at 55 miles an hour in that factory 6th gear at 0.86 ratio, the engine is under considerably more load because the engine is not producing very much power at that low of an RPM. So you would expect to see your fuel economy go down considerably. All right, so again, because it's under more load. But most people that I recommend for most efficiency, keep that sucker up to 3,000 RPM when you're rolling, and running pretty strong, keep it up to 3,000 RPM, and then once you get into 65, 70 miles an hour, then roll it into 6th gear, and that's typically where it'll be most efficient. Everybody following me so far? Thumbs up. Let's see if we got some questions. Drag race my 02 twin cam. Should I adjust the gear ratio on the primary, or would it be better adjust secondary drive by chain driving it? Okay, yeah, we're headed in the right direction. Mike, that's a great question. And let's see. That actually goes in line with the letter here. All right, so keeping in mind with the torque multiplication, what we've got, okay, to a very large degree, we're doing the same thing if we change it in the primary, or if we change it in the transmission, or if we change it in the secondary drive. All right, but we have to remember that where we're changing the gear ratio, changing engine RPM relative to rear wheel speed final, but engine to transmission speed, things like that, it kind of jumps all over the place. When people ask me this question, there's pros and cons in both different directions. So what I like to find out is what the primary objective is. Okay, so like for this gentleman here with his message, his biggest complaint isn't really that he has any issues with the gear ratios in normal operating. Okay, like around town, he makes has no issue with acceleration, nothing like that. He basically just says, I find myself looking for a 6th gear. Okay, so my suggestion would be for him is that since he hasn't complained about wanting more acceleration, wanting anything like that, he's really just looking for a 6th gear, then my opinion would be that we keep all the same ratios or similar ratios through the normal 1st through 5th, and we just need to get him in an overdrive and do that through the transmission. Otherwise, any other means that we do it is going to change the gear ratios all the way completely across the board. So in his case, I would not put him in an OD6 transmission, because the OD6 from Baker is a 0.80 gear. That's a very deep overdrive. For an overdrive that deep, you really need to have some power to be pushing it. So I would put him in a DD6, and then we would discuss what to do, with that lower gear, because there's a couple of different options in the lower gears that change it just a little bit. But that's what I would do for him. Mike, the fact that you drag race yours, I think a lot of that has to be trial and error, because sometimes when you're changing a crank sprocket 1 or 2 teeth can be vastly significant to somebody that's drag racing compared to changing 1 or 2 teeth on the rear. Okay, again, because it's a multiplier as we work our way through. What I would do on that is probably start with doing your final drive with chain and sprocket, because sprockets are relatively inexpensive and you can really dial it in, and then basically what you do from there is calculate what that ratio is when you find the gear that you're really happy with. And then if you find yourself later on that you wanted to do it through primary, then swap it and then just make the ratios match, of course. But I think with drag racing, since conditions change and everything else as much as they do, the best way to attack that one, man, would be through secondary drive, because I would imagine you probably aren't wanting to change it too much, I would imagine. So I hope that helps. Anybody have any other questions at this point? We're rolling along. Wow, we're half an hour into this thing already. Any questions there? Okay, cool. Then the next thing we'll talk about, I mentioned the 5 to 6 speed conversions that are done for the early twin cam, the pre-factory 06 bikes. So when we get into the post 2006 bikes with the factory 6-speed cruise drive, that opens up essentially 4 different options for transmission upgrades. One of those, and I should have some paperwork on it. One of those is the DD7, all right, for Baker. All right, now one thing I want to explain on this, that with the DD7, the interesting thing is your 7th gear, it's not about having a taller gear at the top end. Your 7th gear in the DD7 is the same as the factory 6. Okay, so that gear ratio up there is the same. What changes are the ratios leading up to it. Okay. In addition to that, the parts, these things are whisper quiet. They're helical cut and all that. I mean, they're fantastic transmissions, and we've never had any issues with those. Now, your other 2 options would be flipping over to the grudge box. All right. Now, you've heard me use the term helical cut gears or straight cut gears. All right. I'll show you a picture. All right. See those gears? See how they're all straight cut. All right. A helical gear has teeth. Let's see if we can see this. See if we can get it focused. I don't know, guys. That's kind of hard to see. Sorry about that. But anyway, essentially what happens is the teeth on those gears are cut at an angle. All right. Now, there's a little bit of a pro and a con on that. There's no question that straight cut gears are much stronger. But straight cut gears are stronger. They can be a little noisy. They are noisier than a helical cut gear, but again, they're incredibly strong and they can really take a beating. All right. The other advantage to a straight cut gear is that you have the minimal amount of parasitic loss, basically power loss through the mechanical connection between the 2 gears. So straight cut gears are also very efficient, so you don't have as much parasitic loss there. When you get into the helical cut gears, you do have a little more parasitic loss because the gears essentially are pushing against each other in that helix. But at the same time, they're also a lot quieter. They're not quite as strong, but they are quieter. So that's why Harley has stuck with helical cut gears on the cruise drive transmission. So the deal with the grudge box is it was designed for higher powered engines is what it comes down to. It's just a much stronger transmission with different gear ratio selections than what the DD7 has. So once you get into the grudge box, you actually have 3 different choices. They've got a street version, and then they have 2 strip versions. And then when you get to the street version is the one with your it's a straight cut 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, which are going to be your higher torque, higher force gears there. So you got 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and then your helical on 4th, 5th, and 6th, and that quietens it down a little bit. And that's on the street version. Now on the strip version, you have what they call the strip and then the strip Z version. So the strip has a real wide ratio gearing for your more heavy performance, I mean ultra performance type bikes. Okay, so real heavy gear ratio, wide gear ratio there. The Z has a little tighter gear ratio for the ones that are still the hot rods but not making quite as much. And then of course they do their billet doors and all that type of stuff, and they're just that's great transmissions. And I will mention this, guys, if you wanted to play, and this may be good for you, Mike, if you wanted to play around with some horsepower versus RPM, power range, gear ratio options, and changing primary drive versus secondary drive and all that, then if you hit Baker's website, they have that gear ratio calculator in there that Mike can help you steer in the right direction. And then let's see, that pretty much covers. Normally the intros I would think would take 5 to 10 minutes. This one's taking a little longer than I expected. Yeah, because we're about 40 minutes in at this point. How about you guys? Let's open it up. Anybody have any questions? I know I had some more messages come in from other customers, but I actually don't have them here. And I will tell you, I'll go ahead and mention this. Every fall, every spring, we do the Baker blowout, believe it or not. Again, sorry guys, I don't mean for this to turn into a commercial, but I had a bunch of messages at people asking me what the Baker blowout was. So I'll go ahead and tell you. Basically, we offer, when we install them in groups, excuse me, and we offer killer prices on installing the Baker transmissions. Essentially you buy the transmission from us and we install it at no charge. It's a pretty great deal. For people that are out of state, that are doing their own installs or can't make it this far, we actually do install a lot of them for people out of state. But if you're one of those that couldn't make it here, then give us a call directly and we can work something out. But that would be going, I believe I'm going to end that by the end of November, and then we'll be rolling with that on the Baker blowout. So that's what that is. Anybody else? No other questions? Okay. All right, guys. Well, I'm thinking I did get a lot of questions last week. They seem to be coming in regarding exhaust, tuning products. Of course, we've covered a lot of that before. So I'll give it some thought, figure out what we want to talk about next week. Maybe we'll just give everybody an opportunity. Let's see, Michael, does that include new bearing at the transmission? Okay, if you're referring to on the blowout with the free install, yes, the transmissions, all the transmissions, as a matter of fact, on the cruise drive transmissions, you destroy the bearing when you take it out. So yes, it absolutely, it gets a new main drive gear bearing in there when you put those in. No problem at all, Matt. You are absolutely welcome. I'm actually enjoying this stuff too. It's good. I think one of the big reasons I got into this industry was I love motorcycles from the very beginning, and I see my dad's on here. That's Billy T. Baxter. Hey, Dad. I've got a picture hanging in my shop the first time me and him rode our own Harleys together. That's a pretty special picture to me. But he's loved bikes his entire life, and then of course I ended up making it my career. And one of the things that I found was, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, had a lot to do with the marketing stuff. There's just a lot of marketing hype and things that are out there. And some of it is valid. Yes. I mean, some people have a great product and they don't mind telling you they have a great product. But, the reason I got into this business, and one of the reasons I like doing these videos, is just to give you guys honest answers. And then if it is opinion, I'll tell you it's my opinion. I won't sell you something unless it's a good one, something good, and I won't tell you you need it if you don't. So I think that's important in relationships in this industry. well, any industry for that matter. Like Mike says, gonna make me spend some more money. I will say, I will tell you guys a little story. I remember when Baker first came out with the 7-speed quite a number of years ago, and Mark and James working there at the time. I believe it was James I was dealing with at that point. Of course, Mark is an awesome guy. He's always been there to help. Everybody at Baker's great, man. It's just a great company. They're in this business for the same reason I am. It's just make good parts and do good for good people at a fair price. And but anyway, they were trying to convince me to buy a DD7 and put one in. And I was scoffing at the idea too. Who needs a 7th gear? It's not a Peterbilt with 18 speeds. You know, we don't need that. And finally, they sent me one, and I put it in, and I was really astounded at the difference. Tightening up the lower ratios, get better acceleration, how quiet and crisp and everything else that they run. It's quite a significant improvement if it's in the budget to do one. They're just great setups, and never had a problem with any of them. And I think, guys, that may wrap it up. I'll give it a couple more minutes if anybody has any other questions. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I enjoy this and giving me your time and listening to me rant and rave. And so I greatly appreciate you taking the time to view. If any of you have any other questions or have sparked some interest, feel free to shoot me a private message here on Facebook, call me, or email me, and I'll help you out any way I can. With the holidays coming up, I'm going to shoot again to do this on Thursday of next week, and us stay on this path and of doing it on Thursdays. I would say by Tuesday I would know if we could do it again on Thursday, and we may have to move it to Saturday, but I'll keep you guys informed if you keep an eye on the page. So again, guys, thanks a million. I appreciate what you do. Hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Ride safe.